Hey, Skid Guys here. Let's talk about love. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. That is the love.
Love endures in kindness and sincerity.
What are you doing?
It does not boast, it does not brag, it does not envy.
That's right. Love is all around, so embrace it, capture it, never let it go.
Okay, easy, creepy McCreeperson, all right? You're sounding a little stalkerish.
Stalkerish.
Yeah, embrace it, grab it, never let it go? It's like love needs a restraining order.
I was sharing God's love, just like you were.
No, I'm jamming on a sweet song about love.
Oh, I love jam.
No, do not make fun of breakfast foods. That's the most important meal of the day, you communist. Do you mind?
Not at all. Love doesn't boast, it is not jealous, it does not get angry. It's so fine, you go to find it's all around for you and me. I can't sing with you? I thought you were just singing about love's not rude.
Well, it's also not tone deaf. Love's not proud, it's patient. It does not boast, it's patient. What?
Well, you just put patient in your song twice.
And?
Well, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, there's a lot of adjectives to describe love. It just seems like you'd have more than just using the word patient twice.
Real love, look at me. Real love has a double dose of patience. But you wouldn't know that. You're over here jimmy-legging for me to finish the song.
I just think the people want to hear a biblically based talk on God's love more than they want a hokey, cheesy song.
You just killed my soul. Fine. I'll go elsewhere where my music is appreciated.
Have fun by yourself. Nothing. We sing about God's love. We talk about it. But do we really live it out? Shouldn't God's love be the greatest motivation in everything that we do?
Hey,
Hey, buddy. What's going on?
I couldn't find anyone to appreciate my music. I mean, Faith and Hope, they liked it, but they didn't love it.
Well, I'm glad you're back. I don't think I demonstrated God's love to
You didn't?
very well. And
Not at all.
okay. I think it'd be great if you would share your love song about God.
No, you don't.
I do. No,
don't.
I think it'd be great if you
No,
did.
you don't.
I think it would be very nice.
Just because you begged.
Love protects. Love trusts. Love hopes. Love perseveres. Love never fails. This is a real proud moment for you. Wasn't that the tune to Love Hurts?
Love does hurt. And love stinks. But you know what? What's love got to do with it when it's just
When it's a second-hand emotion.
Get out of my head!
We're done here.
To the bridge!
There's a story about a man who was well known for his love of drinking. And so one evening he sat in the tavern with his friends and he was bragging about how patient and loving his wife was. And so he claimed that no matter what he did or how late he came home, she would always respond with kindness. Well, his friends thought, yeah, right, okay, sure. So, they decided that they were going to put her to the test. So later that night, they stumbled home to his house and demanded that his wife prepare a meal for them. Well, instead of scolding them or turning them away, she quietly got up, cooked them a full supper, and served them with a warm smile. Well, after eating, they felt a little guilty about it, and one of the men said, why are you treating us with such kindness when we've been so rude to you? And she looked at him and she said, you know what, guys? When my husband and I got married, we were both sinners. But by God's grace, I met Jesus and he changed my life. I pray every day that my husband will come to know Christ too. And so I show him love because I want him to see Jesus in me. Well, of course, the room fell silent. These guys had absolutely no idea what to say. They had they had come there to mock her patience, but they were now confronted with a love that, quite frankly, they didn't understand. A love that went beyond human effort. A love that reflected Jesus Christ himself. You know, this man's wife's response illustrates something powerful to us today. Real love is not just about how we feel. It's about how we live. Love is not just a word or an emotion. It is an action. Love is a choice. Love is a way of life. The Apostle Paul calls love in 1 Corinthians 12 the most excellent way. In chapters 13 and 14, he goes on to show us that love is greater than any knowledge, greater than any gifts that we have, greater than anything else in the world we could possibly achieve. Why? Because love reflects the very nature of God. So as we look at the most excellent way of love, that the most excellent way is love this morning, we're going to see 5 things. That the foundation of everything we do is love. Love is the defining mark of our character. Love is the one thing that never fails. Love is the way we serve God and serve others. And love is the love that God first showed us. You know, the world teaches us that love is about what we get. But Scripture teaches us that love is about what we give. The love that this woman, this wife, demonstrated to her husband was not based on how he treated her, not on what she received, but on the love that Jesus Christ had poured into her heart. So I want us to ask ourselves today, are we walking in the most excellent way of love? Let's explore what it means to truly love as Jesus loves. First, we see this morning that love is the foundation of everything that we do. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, in a very familiar passage to us, starting at verse 1, "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames but don't have love, I gain nothing." Paul begins this passage concluding the previous chapter, indicating that he is going to show us the most excellent way, and that way is love. Love is the greatest, period. Finding ourselves in God's love is the most excellent way that we can possibly live. And if we do not have that love, everything else in this life is absolutely meaningless. It doesn't matter what skills or talents we have. It doesn't matter how much faith we claim to have. It doesn't matter what sacrifices we make for our families, for our friends, for our neighbors, or even for the church. It doesn't matter what works we do in God's name. Nothing else matters if we are not acting out of the flowing love of God in our lives. You know, when I was back in high school, I was part of the marching band. You know, and at that time, you know, I could play several different brass instruments, and so, you know, as we would practice during the summer to prepare for the upcoming football season, we would have to learn to all work and function together as a single unit as we were preparing for the halftime show. Well, the drum line, of course, had to be in perfect rhythm. The trumpets had to play the melody perfectly. The flutes and woodwinds would all have to be there to fill in the harmonies. The music would be supported by us in the lower brass with walking bass lines and filling in harmony. Everything had to be just right. So we would practice and practice and practice. But imagine as the marching band took the field during the halftime show of the first home football game. It was the time to perform the show that we had all been practicing all summer to perfect. Imagine, though, what would happen if a rogue trumpet player decides that he's going to run through the field all over the place and playing all kinds of random off-key notes and just blasting his trumpet as loud as it can over top of the rest of the band. It would look a little ridiculous, wouldn't it? No matter how skilled and how practiced the rest of us musicians may have been, that random noise ruins the music and destroys the show that everyone had worked so hard put together. You know, Paul tells us that without love being at the core of our being and at the foundations of our motivations and our actions, we're nothing more than a random rogue trumpet player blasting obnoxiously all this obnoxious noise during an otherwise perfect performance. We may have knowledge. We may have been to Sunday school every single Sunday since the day we were born. And we may have listened to every single one of those Sunday school lessons and even come to church and heard all of the sermons. And we can quote the entire Bible from beginning to end by heart. We may claim to have so much faith that nothing in our lives shakes us. We stand firm no matter what comes our way. We may have been given gifts and talents that would wow the world. We're so talented, no one compares to what we can do. But friends, if we lack love, we're just making a bunch of loud, obnoxious noise. See, God's love gives meaning and harmony to everything that we do. When we do it for Him through His love, we will make a difference in our lives. We will make a difference in the lives around us because we will have pure motives. We won't be doing it just for the show, for me, to lift myself up. We will be doing it for God, and we will truly move the mountains that God has given us. This morning, are we living out our faith with love? Or are we just going through the motions, blasting the trumpet or clanging the cymbals just to be heard? Second, this morning, love is the defining mark of our character. Follow along as we pick up with verse 4 in 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrong. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Now, did you notice what Paul did here? Paul is describing what love should be, right? But did you notice the words that Paul chose? There was not a single word in any of those about feelings. Paul chose words to describe love that were filled with action, with ways that we are to behave, with things we are to do, things we are not to do, as it may be. You see, love, God's love, is not about feelings, because feelings can change in a heartbeat. Love is about the way that we treat each other. Love is about our character, who we are at the core of our being. And our character ought to be defined by love. There's a story told about a couple who were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. And, all of their friends and their children, their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren were all there. Just an amazing testimony to the love that they had had over these 50 years. And as the gifts were opened and the cake was shared and the food was eaten, a friend comes up to the husband and he asks him, he says, "What is your secret to a long and happy marriage?" Well, the man pauses, and as you can see a smile spread across his face, he looks over at his wife and he says, "Well, on our wedding day, I promised to love my wife." He said, "I have spent every day since then learning how to do it better every day." You see, love is not just an emotion. Love is a daily decision. Love is a daily choice of how we are going to act toward others. Are we going to act with patience or exasperation? Are we going to act out of kindness or malice? Do we show humility or arrogance? You see, Paul is teaching us that love is an action that stems from a lifelong commitment to growing in the love of God and for each other, whether it's in our marriages, whether it's in our friendships, whether it is in our family, or even in our relationship with God. If we were to look at our lives, how would others describe us? Are our lives marked with patience and kindness and humility? Or do we struggle with envy, pride, selfishness? May we choose the most excellent way. Third, this morning, love is the only thing, Paul says, that never fails. Paul goes on to write in 1 Corinthians 13 to say, love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when perfection comes, the imperfect disappears. You see, when I was a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. Now we see but a poor reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall be fully known, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. You know, Paul goes through and he lists several spiritual gifts: prophecy, speaking in tongues, and even knowledge. Each of these played an important role in the early church, helping to spread the gospel message to the world. But Paul tells us that there will come a time when these will be no longer needed. The time, my friends, is coming when Jesus will take us home. Faith and hope will no longer be necessary because you know what? We're going to see Jesus face to face. We will no longer have to look forward to heaven in faith, nor will we have to hope for eternity because it will be our reality. And one thing will remain forever: love. You see, love is eternal because it reflects the very nature of God. Reminds me of a story I read about Cape Hatteras Lighthouse down in North Carolina. You know, a lighthouse that has stood firm through some of the most treacherous storms in history, never failing to shine its light to those in need. You know, it stood there for over 150 years. Known as the graveyard of the Atlantic, these waters are some of the most dangerous in the world. Over the centuries, countless ships have been lost to violent storms, shifting sandbars, and unforgiving waves. The story comes to mind that took place in 1884 in December. A vessel called the Ephraim Williams was caught in a terrible storm just off the coast. The ship was battered by the relentless winds and towering waves, leaving the crew stranded for more than 90 hours with no hope in sight. But then something remarkable happened. Seeing their distress, Benjamin Daly, the keeper of the Cape Hatteras lifeboat station, gathered 6 brave men and launched a daring rescue. The sea was wild, the current was strong, and most would have considered it impossible. But Daly and his men rowed 5 miles through the raging storm, determined to reach those stranded sailors. When they arrived, the crew was exhausted, barely clinging to life. One by one, they pulled them from their wreckage into their boat, braving the waves to bring them back to safety. Praise God, not a single life was lost. For their unwavering courage and determination, Daly and his men were awarded the Gold Life-Saving Medal, an honor given only to those who display the greatest acts of heroism at sea. You see, that lighthouse in North Carolina has stood firm through the storm, shining its light, guiding sailors safely home. And the men and women that man it, well, the love and the courage that they show, it doesn't fail. They pressed on through the storm. and through the wind and the waves until every lost sailor was saved. You see, that is the kind of love Paul is talking about. A love that doesn't waver because we don't feel like it today. A love that remains when everything else fades away. A love that endures, that rescues, that never gives up. This is God's love for us. When the storms of life rage, when everything else seems uncertain, God's love stands firm. Just like that lighthouse and knows that man, we are called to reflect his love into a dark and stormy world, to be a light that leads others to Jesus Christ. So when all else fails, when prophecy and knowledge have passed away, when faith and hope become sight, love will remain. Because love is eternal. Are we investing in temporary things today? Or are we investing in a love that lasts forever? Fourth this morning, love is the way that we serve God and that we serve others. Paul starts the next chapter, chapter 14, with these words. He says, "Follow the way of love and eagerly desire spiritual gifts, especially the gift of God." Folks, follow the way of love. It's not just something that we feel. It's not just an emotion. Love is a verb. It's something that we do. It's not, we need to live it out. We need to live out love every day. And love is serving others, sacrificing for them, and putting out their needs before ours. You know, I bet when you visited your grandmother, I bet she wore an apron. I remember visiting my grandparents, Grandma and Grandpa Jackson, and Grandma always had an apron on that she was wearing, especially if she was cooking. And I bet if you think back to those visits, your visits to your grandparents, you can still see that apron, can't you? That old tattered apron that she wore. You know, that apron had been through everything. It was worn, it was stained from years of cooking and gardening and cleaning, but our grandma still wore them, didn't they? Stories told of a little boy who was visiting his grandma one Sunday afternoon, and just like our grandmothers, well, she was wearing her old worn out apron. And the little boy looks up at his grandma and he says, "Grandma, why do you wear that old apron?" She smiles at him, pulls him close, gives him a hug, and says, "You know what? Because love is not about looking good. It's about serving others." You see, throughout the New Testament, we have example after example of Jesus demonstrating his love by serving those around him. You know, on the night before his crucifixion, Jesus did something unbelievable. In John chapter 13, he and his disciples were gathered for the Passover meal. And it says that no servant was present to wash their feet, a customary act of hospitality at that time. So Jesus, the Son of God, got up from the table and he took a towel and he knelt down to wash his disciples' feet. And verse 5 says, after that he poured water into a basin and he began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Wait, what? That's not supposed to happen. The disciples were shocked. You know, washing feet was the lowliest tasks reserved for the household servants. Yet here was their teacher and their Lord performing this act of humility. And Peter even protested, saying, "Lord, I don't think so. You're not washing my feet." He couldn't comprehend why Jesus, the Messiah, the very Son of God, would lower himself in such a way. But Jesus responded in verse 15 and says, "I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you." You know, Jesus wasn't just telling his disciples to love one another. He didn't just give them a command to say, go and do. He was showing them. He was acting it out. He was doing it for them. You see, serving others in love is not beneath us. It's the very thing that Jesus has called us to do. Throughout his ministry, Jesus constantly put the needs of others before his own. He didn't just preach about love, he acted on it. Now consider just for a moment a few of these stories that we read in the scriptures. Jesus touched the untouchable in Mark chapter 1. Jesus healed the lepers, fearing, people who were feared and rejected by society. Jesus restored the broken in Luke 4. We see Jesus giving sight to the blind, making the lame to walk, and casting out demons. Jesus fed the hungry in Matthew 14. Jesus miraculously fed thousands of people who were there on the hillside. Jesus wept with the grieving in John chapter 11 when Lazarus died. Jesus was deeply moved, it says, and he wept, even though he knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead in just very few minutes. That always amazed me. But you see, all of these teach us by example how we should love. Jesus' love was not passive. It was active. It was intentional. It was sacrificial. Paul tells us to follow the way of love. It means serving others just as Jesus Christ served us. Are we following Jesus' examples? Folks, do we reach out to those who feel unworthy, unloved, or forgotten? We show compassion when people are hurting. Do we take action when we see a need? Or do we just say, I'll pray for you, and throw money at it and move on? This morning I pray that we are showing love through our service in our lives, in our families, in our church, and in our community. Finally, this morning, love is the love that God first showed us. You see, the ultimate demonstration of love in action came at the cross. Paul writes in Romans chapter 5 that God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Jesus didn't just love in words, he loved in sacrifice. He gave everything for us. Jesus even said in John 15, verse 13, greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. Jesus came not to just lay down his life for his friends, the 12 that followed him all around as he was preaching and teaching. Jesus didn't just come to give up his life for Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Jesus didn't just come to die for his acquaintances that he met on the roads each and every day. Jesus came into this world to lay down his life, to die on the cruel cross for all sinners, for his enemies, and even those who will reject him. Jesus took the punishment that we deserve. He suffered so that everyone could be given forgiveness. There's a story told about a lifetime. One time he was working along the coast one summer, and as he was doing his normal checks of the beach, he looks out into the ocean and sees a man struggling out in the deep water. And he thinks, if I don't act, this man's going to drown. So without hesitation, he dives in and fights against the waves and pulls the man back to safety. Later, the man asks the lifeguard, he said, why did you risk your life for me? And the lifeguard replies simply, because you were worth saving. Friends, in Jesus' eyes, in God's eyes, we were worth saving. No matter what we have done, where we have gone, what we have been. And saving us is exactly what Jesus did. We were drowning in sin, but he sacrificed himself to rescue us. Love is not just a feeling, it was action. Because of his love, we are called to love others in return. Today, are we willing to sacrifice for others? Are we willing to put down and to lay aside our own desires in order to serve others? Have we fully received God's love? Are we sharing that with those around us? God has taught us that love, it's not always convenient, doesn't always feel good. But friends, it's always worth it. This morning, Paul tells us that love is the most excellent way. The way of living, the way of caring, the way of sharing, the way of loving. Love is not about words we may say. Love is not about words we may not say. Love is not just an emotion that we feel. Love is about action. We are called to follow the most excellent way. That's a life defined by love. Stories told of a soldier back in World War II who was stationed overseas. And as many soldiers did back then, the only real way to communicate back home was to write letters. And so one day he wrote a heartfelt love letter to his fiancée who was waiting for his return back home. Well, for some reason or another, the letter was put into a box. It was never opened. Years later, as she was cleaning out some old things from the attic, she found the unopened letter in a box of old things. She had never read it, never knew what it said, never responded to the love he expressed. How sad. You know, this morning God has written us the greatest love letter ever written, called the Bible. Through it, he tells us how much he loves us. He tells us what he has done, how he has shown his love for us. And he asks for us to love him in return. The question is, will we open it? Will we receive it? Will we live it out? I challenge you this morning, if you've never let God's love into your life, then surrender to him. If you have given your life to him, then this morning I challenge you to evaluate your love. Where do you need to grow in patience or in kindness or in humility? I challenge you to demonstrate your love through action this week. Find some way to serve someone else in this upcoming week. And I challenge you to reflect on God's love and spend time in gratitude for the greatest love ever given. This morning, may we experience and live out God's love. For the most excellent way of everything is love.